So I must say that my first memories of refugees could not have been from 1947, because I'm actually fully 10 years younger than I look, as if born together with Indian independence. But I've read Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan, so I have those derived memories. Moving forward to 1971, if you all remember, we earlier had an interesting session with 4 IMCNs of Joka at our book club, when almost 1 million refugees arrived in India that year, and almost as many got killed in just 100 days in the Rwandan genocide of 1994. So today we are going to reflect on that calamity using the author's voice, having read The Girl Who Smiled Beads. So with that, let me hand over to Srinivas for the curtain call and birthdays.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So first we'll start with the birthday. So we have two, Arvind Meyer and Sriram are the birthday boys. I think both of them are not here, but we'll wish them anyway.
Nice to hear hearty birthday music.
Yeah,
Very good. Yeah.
very good. Always impressive what Yanks puts together.
Lot of effort, Yanks.
Yeah, now I think what Milind said is RMs have become smarter. So they seem to be suggesting books where there is a one clear winner. So this time again, we have a landslide winner, The Good Shufu by Tracy Slater. It got 70% of the votes, unprecedented. And that's a book we'll be reading in the month of June for July session.
Wonderful. So that takes us over to Japan in 2 months, after we've read Born a Crime by Trevor Noah next month. Okay.
Right. So
Thank
now
you, Srinivas.
let us get into the main theme.
Yes.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana.
Yeah, I think they're all very happy bunch of people. And what happened to them, we'll hear from RM and reflectors now.
Great. Thank you, Srinivas. So we'll start with Kumud as the ROM who recommended today's book. And she's going to provide what I think is definitely a very perceptive overview of this book. And then we have 3 equally intense reflections, and then a new idea, a bookend as well, before we get on to the open discussion. So Kumud, over to you.
Thank you, Milind. Are you putting it on screen, Yangs? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So as I mentioned when I was asking you to vote for these books, that I wanted to look at women authors. And when I chanced upon these series of memoirs and biographies, it really hit me that you know, these are unknown people, unknown authors, but these kind of stories need to be brought out, you know, because you learn a lot. Look at these people who you don't know, but how brave they are and what all they've been through. So Clementine Womaria is 35 years old. And when she wrote this book, when she published it, she was only 29 something. She was around 30 years old. To document her life at such a young age, while still carrying the scars of a horrific experience as a genocide survivor, it takes some courage. And I really, really felt that. I'm so glad this book was chosen, you know. My mother, who's I'll talk about later, at 86, still remembers what they went through in 1947. So for her to document and put it across must have taken some guts. The title of this book, The Girl Who Smiled Beads, actually refers to a story told to her by her nanny as a child, in which she was allowed to control the plot and the destiny of the characters. So she could provide any ending, you know, what the characters would do. And it helped her because she used that as a metaphor throughout her life. And that's throughout the narrative, saying that the girl who smiled beads gave me a way to go through the world, to believe in my own agency and my right to make decisions for myself. We'll hear more about this from Trivi, because he's reflecting on beads as a theme, as a sort of metaphor. So in her memoir, Clementine recounts her experiences as a little girl during the Rwandan genocide. And you've all read the book. So it's a journey from refugee to safety in the US. And it starts with her childhood memories of living happily in Rwanda with her family. However, when the genocide begins in 2006, she's only 6 years old, and she's forced to flee by her parents to her grandmother's place, along with her sister, who's a teenager at that time. They spent 6 years wandering from country to country, facing numerous challenges and dangers. It's heart-rending, really, to read what they have been through, these two young people, you know. Hunger, disease, poverty, violence, before moving finally as refugees on refugee status to America. Next, please. Yeah, and after many years, well, they eventually reunite with their parents, but that's not the point here right now. I mean, having to adjust to a life in the US, it wasn't easy for either of the sisters. And for Clementine, she struggled to reconcile her past experiences with her new life in a foreign land. She did her schooling there for the first time, you know, when she reached there, and it was a tough time for her, dealing with the racism and you know, other things. Throughout the book, she reflects on the themes of displacement, identity, family, survival, trauma, resilience. And she shares the struggles she faced in understanding her identity as a Rwandan refugee living in the US and the emotional toll it took on her mental health. She also highlights the importance of family and the sacrifices they made to stay together during their journey, and particularly her sister. Hats off. I wish I had, you know, said that let's talk about Claire, her sister, as a separate subject altogether, because she really made it happen for them. You know, the hustling that she did to keep food on the table and, you know, earn some money. As well as the moments of hope and kindness that sustained her throughout, whether in the refugee camps or the family in the US when she reached there. There was a lot of kindness which was bestowed upon them. Contrary to a memoir typically written in chronological order, Clementine recounts her story as a dual narrative, which keeps alternating between scenes from her refugee camp story in Africa and her life in America. I felt this was a very powerful way of narration. I read some reviews saying, what is this going on? You know, it's very, very confusing. But to me, it was a very powerful way of narration, as it allowed her to explore her experiences and memories of the genocide and its aftermath from two different perspectives. So there are three key points I want to point out here or talk about. The first is her narrative of her childhood experience in Rwanda before the genocide. While the second narrative is that of her journey as a refugee seeking safety and stability in various countries after the genocide. By presenting both these side by side, I felt she was able to provide a more complete and nuanced portrait of her experiences and how they have shaped her and her identity. No, where are we? I think we missed a page. This is not mine. This isn't mine. No, I think
It's not yours?
No, this is Trivi's, I think.
Okay, there seems to be some mix-up. Okay.
Do you want me to share my version?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is correct.
Yeah, this is correct, Kumud.
But the next page,
Okay, we'll come to that. I mean, this you can complete and we'll see that.
this we completed.
Okay. This is not yours.
No.
This is not yours.
This is mine.
Yeah,
But
go
there's
ahead.
something else missing. There's one page missing.
Okay, can you talk or you want me to pull out the draft?
I can hang on.
I think you better talk. Just talk and let's
Yeah,
finish.
just talk and finish.
Just talk. Yeah.
Okay, but I have to open that now, my screen. Okay,
Yeah, sure.
so yeah, 1 second. Yeah, so as I said, the dual narrative allows her to highlight the difference between her life before and after the genocide. Before the genocide, she enjoyed a relatively privileged upbringing, while afterwards she was forced to flee and live as a refugee for several years. By juxtaposing these two narratives, Clementine is able to emphasize the profound impact that the genocide had on her life and the lives of those around her. Further, this dual narrative approach, I felt, allows her to explore the various themes of memory, identity, and belonging that are central to her memoir. By showing how her experiences as a refugee have shaped her memories and sense of self, Clementine is able to provide a powerful meditation on the nature of trauma and the ways in which it can shape and define us. And I think Vinita is talking more about this bit in her reflection. Overall, The Girl Who Smiled Beads is a powerful and moving account of one woman's journey through unimaginable hardship and the ways in which she has learned to navigate her place in the world. It highlights the ongoing struggle for human rights and dignity in the face of adversity. The book is an important reminder of the need for empathy, compassion, and support for refugees and other marginalized communities. Just now, the Sudanese conflict, the conflict in Sudan, the UN has estimated there could be 800,000 displaced people. So it is real, and much needs to be done on this front. And this book highlights something very, very important. Reading her story also reminded me of what my parents went through during the partition of India. Is that the page you have now?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
Reading reminded me of what my parents went through during the partition of India in 1947, when at least 14 million people were displaced and as many as 1 million were killed in the violence. My father was 15 then, and he, by the way, got lost and reunited with his family after many days and weeks. And my mother was 10 years old then, and her father was in the police, and he stayed back in Pakistan, and they met him, or he found them 6 months later, and through a radio announcement, by the way. At 86 now, My mother can still clearly recall the horrors of the partition over 75 years ago. If you indulge me, Milind, can I get 30 seconds more?
Sure, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I want to share something with my mother said. Mother said when my daughter and I were in India to meet her, and we were talking about something, and she suddenly started talking about days gone by, and obviously I couldn't share because it was part of another conversation. I don't know if you can hear it.
Yes.
No, Kumud, we cannot clearly hear it. You just summarize it for us. Kumud, we couldn't hear it.
I think you should post the clip.
Yeah, cannot hear it.
Kumud, we
You're
cannot
not
hear.
able to hear.
No.
Just post it to us.
No, I
Yes, you
can't.
can.
I cannot
You
post
can't
it.
post.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's part of a larger conversation. Let me
All
try.
right.
If it
Okay.
doesn't work, it's okay. I'll try later.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
But you have to listen to it. It's a very, very important thing that she said, and it goes very well with what happened here. Okay. So in closing, I must say that I admire Clementine for sharing her story with the world, for coming to terms with the horrors she endured at such a young age and choosing to become a human rights advocate, fighting for injustice and speaking up on behalf of conflict survivors. And now thanks. Now over to the reflectors for today's session, who will delve into some of the key themes in this book. Thanks for
Great.
listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kumud.
Thank you,
I
Kumud.
think
Very
your
nice.
personal memories added a lot of realism to what we are about to discuss.
So
And
basically, I'll just tell
yeah.
you what my mother had said, if you don't mind. She said
Mhm.
that her father was taking the train. He was sitting in this train to come to India, and the Hindus were all cut down to size. They were killed.
Mm,
He had on his arm Jahangir written.
mm,
Apparently in Bachpan, they used to put all these various kinds of names. And one of the Muslim guys who knew him from before called out to him and said, Jahangir, how are you? And then told these guys that he is my chacha's son. And
mm.
that's how he was saved. And she says, my father used to recount in the dabba, in the train full of dead bodies, he was the only survivor. And
Wow.
it was horrible, you know? So that is what she was talking about with tears in her eyes even today,
Mm,
right? Yeah. And by the way, I'm from Ambala and I've been through 3 wars myself.
mm.
And I remember, you know, our house windows breaking. We live very near the Air Force, the aerodrome, and you know, we've been through a lot, and we were displaced. We had to move to the hills. So anyhow, nothing
That-
as what Clementine has been through.
Well, the violence that you described, I still vividly remember in a few pages in Khushwant Singh's book. So
Yeah.
it is traumatic.
Uh,
Thank
for
you
the-
again. And
If I may make a comment,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
for those who are interested in works on partition, the most touching book I have read is by an author by name Yashpal. I will write the name. It was either written in Hindi or Urdu, I'm not sure. The original title of the book was Chuta Sach, and
Mhm.
it has now been translated into English under the name That Was Not the Dawn.
Mm,
It is about 1,000 pages. It's a huge epic kind of work. And I've not seen any other work in India which address the horrors of partition as well as this particular book did.
Thank you. Thank you for recommending it, Abdul.
Mhm.
Make good reading. So I just wanted to say that I think Kumud has put in a lot of effort apart from her overview in developing the themes for today's reflections. Very thoughtfully done. And we are going to start with Nidhi reflecting on war, women, and survival. Shankar is then going to develop the theme of displacement of refugees with the significance of beads in the book that we've read, as Kumud said earlier. And finally, Vinita has the theme of trauma and memory. And it is going to be, as you will see, a very fitting sequel to Shankar's beads reflection. So let's get going with Nidhi's reflection. Over to you, Nidhi.
Thanks, Milind. So as Kumud said, the book describes the journeys of primarily Clementine and her sister Claire as Rwandan refugees who travel in 7 African countries over 6 years before coming to the US and then their lives in the US. Clementine is 6 and Claire is 16 when they flee Rwanda. They are just children and yet must cope with the loss of their home, their family, indeed their entire carefree lives prior to the conflict. They wander from one refugee camp to another, refusing to succumb to the unrelenting misery around them. Claire is a hustler. Even as a child, she figured out a way to save some of the grocery money her mother gave her by negotiating a rate with a fixed vegetable vendor. She puts these skills to clever use in the camps by bartering, trading, and working her way somehow to eking out a small livelihood. Later, she gets jobs as a maid and domestic helper to enable Clementine and herself to survive. She even marries Rob, an aid worker who pursues her relentlessly because she sees marriage to Rob as a way out of the refugee system. In Chicago, she and Rob divorce and she raises her 3 kids by herself. Not only that, but she also manages to bring her parents and siblings from Rwanda to the US. And every weekend she feeds other refugees and offers them support in her small apartment. To me, Claire is the real heroine in this book, not just for sticking by and providing for her younger sister, her kids, and her family, but also for her pride, her spirit, and her refusal to consider herself less than anyone, Oprah Winfrey and Angelina Jolie included. Clementine is a child when the sisters leave Rwanda, and she mostly focuses on staying alive while in Africa. In the US, as a refugee, she is initially covertly hostile to the people who want to help her. Later, she is also sometimes overtly hostile. Example, when she lashes out in drama productions at school or in discussions at the private boarding school she is sent to for her final year. She openly talks about the problems she has reconnecting with her parents and younger siblings or developing close relationships with her boyfriends. She suffers when she goes back to visit Africa. She suffers when she visits Israel. I think Clementine still suffers. Both Claire and Clementine suffer, physically and mentally, while they are in Africa. They suffer again, more mentally than physically when they are in the US. But they survive in the sense that now both have outwardly somewhat successful and stable lives. However, there is still so much anger and bitterness in Clementine. Claire, on the other hand, seems to have come to a sort of peace. Although we must remember that the storyteller is Clementine, so while she can be very honest about her own feelings, and I agree with Kumud, I really admire her for putting down all her experiences in such honesty. But we must deduce Claire's feelings and rely on Clementine's filter in describing them. In a telling incident one day in the US, Claire and Clementine are discussing the Rwandan genocide, and Clementine keeps asking Claire whether she can ever forgive the killers. But Claire says she's over that and doesn't want to discuss it anymore, which Clementine finds very hard to understand. Perhaps because the child Clementine felt even more powerless than Claire while they were refugees in Africa, Clementine still has a lot to work through. Frankly, I don't think it is possible for 99% of people to undergo the kind of trauma these two girls did and ever really recover. Just as war veterans suffer PTSD or children in abusive households are permanently scarred, I feel these two sisters, in particular Clementine, have been permanently marked by their experiences. Their mother, with her strong religious beliefs, seems in fact to have recovered more easily. Perhaps religion, meditation, drugs, psychotherapy, a combination of all, can help victims of such tragedies. Yes, the sisters survived their suffering because both made it out alive, but I think the scars will always be there. This isn't necessarily fully a terrible thing. Both sisters are able to help out refugees in their own ways. Probably they are very appreciative of the simple pleasures of life. They've learned valuable lessons in how to read people, be persistent, etc. I guess what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but definitely at a price.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, Nidhi.
Very
That was
nice.
a really nice reflection on how women refugees can survive, cope, and or thrive in their afterlives after escaping such a violent genocide and war. So thanks for that reflection.
Just one comment can I make? Can I make one comment?
Sure.
Yeah. Nidhi, you got absolutely what I slightly referred to, and I agree that, you know, Claire is the real heroine here. Talking about the mother, when she mentioned that she recovered more easily because she had religious beliefs, but the mother didn't go through the trauma that these kids went through in the various refugee camps. So I guess it made it that much more easier, along with the religious faith and beliefs, to overcome
You
the
know,
situation.
Kubud, she doesn't talk that much
Yeah.
about what her mother went through, but reading between the lines, it
Yeah.
seems that the parents had a very tough time too. And remember that they lost the elder brother. And and that is terrible for any parent to, lose your child, though it wasn't due to the war, it was due to disease, but
Yeah.
that's an after effect of the war. I think
Yeah.
the mom's religious beliefs helped her a lot.
Agreed.
I think
agreed.
that that really played a role. People who are able to believe in, God's will and recovery helped. And don't forget that also those two were older. The parents were older and they had each
Yes.
other.
Yeah.
These girls were very young, especially
Yeah.
Clementine.
Yeah.
I feel really bad because however much one may do for refugees of all kinds, whether it's war or whether it's abuse, I don't think that the scars ever go away. I think that they might fade and they perhaps become more bearable. But just as our experiences mark each of us, good ones or the bad ones also mark us. But
Great.
I don't think it's necessarily bad. It all depends on how you deal with it.
True.
Yeah, Nidhi,
That's true.
let's continue this very engaging conversation during the open session. if
Sure,
that's
Milind.
okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
So let's move on to Shankar, and as Kumud said, his reflection around the theme of beads in the book. Go ahead, Shankar.
Okay, I'm looking at this not very flattering photograph of myself, but the book's title stems from a traditional fairy tale that Clementine's nanny Mukamana would tell her when she was a child growing up in Kigali, Rwanda.
This
The
is
tale
mine.
is
Just
about
one sec. This is
Yeah.
mine.
I'm
Yanks.
reading from I'm
Okay.
reading from my
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
notes over
Shankar.
here.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
the tale is about a girl born of thunder who became lost and roamed the earth, always smiling and leaving a trail of beads behind her. Mukamana would leave it up to young Clementine to imagine how the story would end. And whatever plot she chose, Mukamana would make it come true. When Clementine and her sister Claire had to flee the Rwandan genocide and endure suffering and hardship, traveling for 6 years through 7 countries, living in multiple refugee camps, the fairy tale was a source of solace for Clementine. The beads offered her escapism from the real world of poverty, starvation, rape, war, and death into a fantasy world. Beads were fire, were water, or even time. The beads were a way to bend and mold reality. And in her mind, Clementine was always safe, always one step ahead, and she never gets caught. Beads are her katundu, her luggage, her stuff, her collection. She collects rocks and marbles on her journey and carries them in her rucksack until she loses them in a bus in Maputo, Mozambique. And these beads give her hope and fortitude. While this aspect is not mentioned in the book, beads are also a rosary in Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist cultures. Beads are used to meditate, to reflect, to provide the faith and courage to follow a chosen path. This book highlighted to me the difference between a refugee fleeing genocide and an economic migrant. Refugee and migrant travels and travails are everywhere. You know, the Colombian-Venezuelan border, the southern US border. In Amitav Ghosh's book, we talked Gan Island, we talked about the refugees in the Mediterranean, and now in Ukraine. But one of the worst genocides has been afflicted in Rwanda, with almost 1 million people killed and many millions displaced. And the hatred between the Hutus and the Tutsis was fostered over decades, starting with the German and the Belgian colonists, and amplified into a frenzy in 2003, 2004 by this extremist radio station, RTLM. And when you become a refugee, you go from a person who is away from home to a person with no home. You're not wanted by anyone. You do not have any identity papers, no visas, and you're unable to travel legitimately. And therefore, you're subjected to the mercy and the greed and the cruelty of others. A refugee camp is your only option to live, and it's equivalent to a prison. You depend on handouts for food and for shelter and for everything. Clementine lived in multiple countries, in many refugee camps, in very adverse conditions, and yet she maintains her fighting spirit, her identity, her language, and most important, she cherishes her childhood tales. Clementine wanted to smile everywhere, leaving her trail of beads. The stories became a blanket and helped her overcome adversity. Clementine's sister, though, Claire, exemplifies resilience. She is forever entrepreneurial, finding innovative ways to make money and move on, hopefully, to something better. After arriving in America, Clementine suppresses the torment, the agony of her early nomadic life. She's always trying to fit in, to smile, to be nice, to tell everyone what they want to hear. And only when she's in her 20s does she start to find her real emotions. Her sister Claire and her parents understandably do not want to talk about and relive the past. They would rather forget the past, live in the present, and think about the future. So the question for me is, what would you do if you were in a similar situation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shankar. I particularly liked your reference to beads across cultures and religions as a meditative and spiritual facilitator. We are, familiar with a string of beads right from childhood, looking at it in the hands of grandparents or somebody more elderly. So thank you for that very intense reflection. We move on to Vinita now. And she is going to reflect on the theme of trauma and memory. And as you will see, it's a very fitting sequel to Shankar's intense beads reflection. Go ahead.
Can we give a minute for Trivy? I think he's got one personal note.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to keep it short. So, her story is what makes me proud to say I'm an American. There are many things wrong with our American society, we all know that. But there are very few countries who would take in Claire, her kids, Clementine, and give them refuge. I researched this, and I found out about this organization. And not only were they settled comfortably in an apartment, they were looked after by a local upper middle class family, the Thomases, who ensured she was educated. She got her identity papers, and she was able to realize her full potential. After attending a boarding school, imagine, where she's polishing her upper English language skills. She graduates from Yale University. The generosity and humanity of the American public is really immense. So
I agree.
Lovely.
I agree completely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very
Well,
good.
well-
Thank you,
Well said,
Shankar.
Sridhi. Concur.
Yeah. Let's go to Vinita's reflection on trauma and memory now. And during the open discussion, we can come back to what we left off. Go ahead, Vinita.
Yeah. Can I? Yeah. The book is a memoir in which Clementine narrates her story of a childhood stolen when conflict in Rwanda forced her and her sister Claire to become refugees. Clementine pieces together her deeply personal story, which she uses to give meaning to her life. Clementine wants to string together the narrative of her life as one would string together beads. So she starts collecting odds and ends that represent memories or places she has been. She hopes to one day line these pieces up in a coherent order. Later on, Clementine literally strings together something beautiful from jumbled pieces by making bracelets from a collection of beads that her American host family gives her. Throughout the memoir, beads represent Clementine's fragmented life. One of the beads in her memoir is her Mickey Mouse backpack, more specifically the loss of it. This represents her sense of unbelonging as a refugee. Rob's family in Uvira, Zaire, initially gives her the backpack. While living with the family in Zaire, Clementine felt special and loved for the first time since leaving her parents and her childhood home in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide. When Clementine and Claire leave Uvira and become refugees again, Clementine holds on to the Mickey Mouse backpack as her most valued possession. She fills it with rocks from every place she and Claire pass through, trying to hold on to landmarks that will cement and memorialize her transitory life. She also collects marbles for her brother Pudi in the backpack, wanting to have something to give him when she gets home. When Clementine accidentally leaves her Mickey Mouse backpack on a crowded bus, she is devastated. The loss of the backpack symbolizes the loss of her life story, since it contained everything that captured her fractured life since becoming a refugee. Clementine starts to hope that she'll ever belong anywhere, or that she'll ever get back home. The tragic loss of the backpack is repeated when Claire and Clementine arrive in the United States and the airline loses their bag. The loss of this bag, which held the few items they had painstakingly collected before leaving Africa, is once again the loss of the past. Throughout the novel, the loss of possessions, particularly the loss of the Mickey Mouse backpack, represents the refugee experience. The loss of the backpack is the loss of childhood, home, continuity, and possession. Everything that makes a person feel they belong.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Very
Thank
touching,
you.
end, Vinita. And I think, you vividly brought out how, in spite of traumatic, devastating experiences, we all try to hold on to happier memories symbolically. And that was very nicely captured in your reflection.
Thank you.
So with that, we move on to the bookend, read together with the book's author, Clementine Vamaria, personified here for all of us. Okay. So let's move on to the bookend.
Prelude.
To get a more wide-ranging perspective on what it means to be a woman who has been a refugee and has emerged out of that nightmare, one must also perhaps read books like This is What America Looks Like by Ilhan Omar and Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, also a Somalian woman who served in the Dutch parliament. Let me reflect on sisterhood first, using several of the powerful words from the author of the non-fiction book we all have read, And the Darkness Around Genocide. Let me then turn to the importance of family and community in such trying times for women refugees. The Girl Who Smiled Beads. On sisterhood first, the journey begins when Clementine was just 6 and Claire 15 in 1994. The prologue indicates Clementine's good fortune contrasted against Claire's hard life.
I was 18, a junior in New Trier High School, living Monday through Friday with the Thomas family in Kennethsworth, a fancy suburb. I was whoever anybody wanted me to be. Claire, meanwhile, remained steadfast herself and a seemingly rougher bargain. Unlike me, she was not a child when we got resettled into the United States, so nobody sent her to school or took her in or filled her up with resources, piano lessons, speech therapists, cheerleading camp. Claire just kept hustling. It was when she learned it was illegal to sell liquor without a license that she started working full-time as a maid, cleaning 200 hotel rooms a week.
Moving back. Yeah, go back a slide. Yeah, go back one slide, Srinivas. Yeah, there. That's the track we want. Moving back. Yeah, moving back to.
1 minute.
Moving back, yeah, to the beginnings of their journey as a pair of refugee girls.
The ride to Bouterre, where our grandmother lived, took forever. Claire insisted we played a silent game whenever I asked a question. We didn't eat kebabs or buy the soap that we always brought to my grandmother as a gift. We didn't even stop to use the bathroom. Claire and I thought about nothing, not ever. Claire and I talked about nothing, not ever.
Obviously, this refers to the larger life issues.
Claire taught me never to accept gifts. She learned this from our mother. There are no gifts, Claire said. No candy, no bread, especially from men. She insisted on figuring out how to survive indebted to no one, so she hustled. I started reading Elie Wiesel's Night. The way he talked about his father, the devotion and the resentment, that was Claire.
During their hazardous travels fleeing from one country to another, Claire was the sole guardian for Clementine and her growing family as well, as husband and children entered her life. She was the one who, by premonition or by dint of picking up critical information from the outside world, always took action for this family so they averted disaster and loss of any life. Clementine thought she was hated by her old sister, but in fact, Claire did not hate, but protected her. In turn, Clementine rarely expressed gratitude to her sister until much later during their repeated journeys. So often in my own life have I failed in voicing my gratitude to my near and dear ones for their tremendous contributions to my life. While time has unfortunately run out for some, there is still time to redeem myself, at least partially. The angst of refugees fleeing from genocides is what makes family and community critical.
Oh, is it like the Holocaust?
Someone asked Clementine.
No, it's not like the Holocaust or the killing fields in Cambodia or ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. There is no catch-all term that proves you understand. You cannot line up the atrocities like a matching set. You cannot bear witness with a single word.
Speaking for myself, I just spent a few hours in Jallianwala Bagh in India some years ago, in the midst of flowing tears. And even that tip of the iceberg was sharp enough for a lifetime of reminders of what inhuman cruelty can look like. Now turning to the importance of family and community, the very ones that they missed dearly.
I did not yet know the political history of Rwanda. I knew the president's plane had been shot down. I remembered that now. My mother, terrified, came into my room one early morning and told me he was killed. And then we knelt down and prayed. But that was it. I just thought of the enemy then as a bad guy who steal. I believed they were going to steal us, but worse. I thought, Abajura, people are coming. Then they did come, and I ran away from the bad people, and the bad people stole my parents from me. Now I was sitting here in Kenilworth, across a rift in the galaxy a million miles wide, learning about one group of people killing another group of people, people that they lived with and knew. This genocide, I read in a very matter-of-fact terms, started in April 8, 1994, and lasted 100 days. One group, the Hutus, killed another group, the Tutsis.
Slowly but surely, Claire was making a dent in the process of getting her family together again. She traveled back to Rwanda a couple of times after establishing the existence and whereabouts of her parents, trying her best to take care of her ailing father and getting her parents with her to the US. Even though her own marriage was falling apart, she was helping her siblings and her children find their identity back, one piece at a time. In the several years of wilderness as refugees in between, both Claire and Clementine went through travails that resulted in, using Clementine's words, the pieces of my identity rattled in my head like loose change. 3 generations of family lived together again in the US, trying to recreate the life Clementine and Claire remembered from their childhood. The strength the reunion brought back to them is difficult to recreate just in words. In the midst of all the turmoil caused in their lives by the genocide, the First Congo War, and the Great War of Africa, Claire stood unwavering like the rock at Gibraltar, taking each blow coming her way on the chin, protecting her parents, her siblings, her children, and also her unfaithful husband. There cannot be better testimony to what strength family and community can bring when the seas are so rough and you are helplessly sitting in a boat. You worry can sink unexpectedly at any unsuspected moment. Thank you. These readings also are quite telling that occur in the book that we read, the book Night by Elie Wiesel, and On the Natural History of Destruction by Sibbald for further reading. So with that, we complete.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Very
We
nice, yes.
complete our bookend, and let's get into an open discussion on the book.
A quick question before that, Milind.
Yeah.
Is that Clementine's voice that you had?
I went through several iterations. I tried to recreate her voice using fakeyou.com, which is available. That didn't succeed. I asked Shankar to get in touch with Clementine because she's in San Francisco. And he told me she's become a professional reader who charges 20 to 50K now that she's been on the Oprah show. So we can't afford that. So finally, I asked a colleague of mine whose voice resembled hers to join me in the recording.
Unbelievable. Thank you,
Amazing.
Milind.
Yeah, that was
Amount
amazing.
of effort,
Fantastic.
the amount of effort which goes behind in the book club is unimaginable.
Yes.
Yeah. I should also thank Arun because I said, the publisher is in Toronto. So can you please call the publisher to see if we can get Elizabeth Weil to come and speak to us. And Arun immediately contacted them. I got in touch with the publisher. The publisher who was responsible for the book, the publicist, Penny is her name. she got back only 3 days ago saying, I'm sorry, I got the note late from my headquarters. And she tried hard to ask Liz Weil to make a video recording, but it failed. So otherwise they would have had Liz Weil's video clip as well. But each time, like you said, thanks to Anjali once, we got William Dalrymple. Thanks to Anu, we got the Justice Albie Sachs in South Africa. We got her aunt to speak. So all of us pulled together with extraordinary effort, and that's what makes this so rewarding.
Both of you, your dedication is unparalleled. This
Yes.
is truly proud of both of you to have in our group.
Well,
Absolutely,
with
absolutely.
a team like this, it
Yeah.
becomes easier. That's all I can say. So whoever wants to begin the open discussion, go ahead.
Just one minor comment. About 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Sarajevo and travel through Bosnia. And virtually everyone whom I met had a story to tell. Every building that I saw had bullet holes. And these were people who lived as neighbors for centuries, who turned against each other. It tells me that there is some latent inhumanity that lurks beneath everything. And all it takes is one hate mongerer to light up the flames of that and turn us against each other.
Mhm.
And therefore, we have to be always constantly be vigilant against, these kinds of fascist leaders who make identity the biggest issue in their political lives for their own political gain.
That's true, Abdul.
true.
Are there any
Right.
ways in which these feelings can be let out in a comparatively less harmful way, like the old Roman tradition of circuses and gladiators? Can people's inherent, suppressed violent tendencies be let out in some other way that society can accommodate? I
There
heard,
is
for
one-
example, in Japan, people pay to beat someone up
Correct.
because society is so tightly controlled. There's all this inner frustration. You can hire someone and beat them up.
Some festivals were a way of expressing that. There is one particular temple in Kerala where on the festival day, each village wins a team, and the team's job is to utter the worst possible galis against all of the other villages. They engage in a day-long gali competition. And that sort of lets out all the frustrations and anger. And at the end of that, they are all fine. Okay. No physical violence, just gali, and everybody knows it is just for this festival day.
Mm.
And then they continue to live
Yeah, they
comparatively
continue to live
peacefully
fine
together.
after that.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. I remember in my first year at IMC, we had an inter-hostel gali competition.
We used to have that at IITs too, Abdul,
Okay.
every now and then.
So
By
are
the way,
probably-
this also reminds me of one of the first books that we read, and I'm forgetting the name, I'm sorry, where we were debating, where we were wondering, are human beings intrinsically good or are they intrinsically bad?
That was
They are
human.
both. They are both.
Yeah.
They are
That was
both.
the very first book we read, I think, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I seem to recollect that after reading the book, I got the impression that we are intrinsically bad and will turn on another if there is any, even a marginal gain to ourselves. And so at the end of the day, we are animals.
But the way it works also is, I'm reminded of the Economist cover 2 weeks ago, which shows AI on top. And then it shows one bar like God and the other bar, the devil. So it's all how we
Right.
think of ideas and how we use them.
Sure,
It
fair
can
enough.
be a God view or it can be a devil's view.
Yeah.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, I think in some ways, the societal norms, whether it's the 10 Commandments or whether it is, you know, the Dhamma precepts or whatever, create a social framework for people to live well together in a community. Because as you say, Gautam, if people are let loose, then a person wants to dominate another person. You see it with parents and their own children sometimes. You see it in marriages where people try to dominate other people. You see it where the police sometimes misuse their power. When they think nobody is looking, they behave badly. So when you believe that there's, sometimes I think in the olden days, you believe that there was a higher power watching over you. So you, in that fright, you, out of fear of that, you maintained it. But maybe that's why we need governance, we need governments, we need social
Society.
we need society, because if you didn't have that, man intrinsically is not that helpful towards each other. On the other hand, Gautam, there was, I remember this old quote. One anthropologist was asked when you know, there was a hip bone which was discovered, some skeleton which was discovered where the hip bone had been mended. And he said, what does this mean? You know, what is this thing? And she said, it means the beginning of civilization, because it means that there was the beginning of empathy. Somebody in the wild, if somebody breaks a bone, that person dies because nobody is around to look after that person and nurture them and care for them. But if somebody's hip bone has been splintered and somebody's been fed while that bone is being mended, then that means that there's empathy and caring. And maybe that is the beginning of civilization. So while of course, I agree with you 100% that people intrinsically, they have these animal impulses. Maybe there are also other impulses which are civilizing or socializing.
In this context, one point of view from the book, if I may communicate. You see, in this book, I found that there were 3 pillars. The obvious largest pillar was the central pillar, which is 2 young girls trying to run away and make a life for themselves out of the carnage, you know, that was happening in Rwanda. But I saw 2 other pillars, which were society as we know it today, developed Western society. There are only 3 or 4 references to the left pillar, which is the Belgians, and not so much the Germans who actually colonized Rwanda first. But how the Belgians, much like what the British did with us, divide and rule, Muslim Hindu. What they did in Rwanda, the Belgians, was the Hutus were about 70–80% of the population. They made distinctions between Hutus and I think Tutsis, and there was a 3rd tribe, I forget. But the 3 tribes constituted 100%. So in effect, the Belgians put in place everything that would then lead to the genocide. You know, much like that we've seen, and Kumar talked about it actually in India. But on the right side, I saw another pillar which Trivi touched upon so beautifully, which is, so here's another civilized Western society, developed world, and look what they do and what they did for these, for at least this one girl, Clementine. You know. So that was something else that you know, that came to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very well pointed out. I wanted to say in reaction to what you said earlier, Gautam, about people being inherently bad. I remember Bertrand Russell saying that human beings are the only species on this planet who believe in mass annihilation of themselves. No other species does that. No other species.
I think Krips and Ramarao want to talk. I think you can, one of you can
go
start.
ahead. Ravi, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I was just wanting to build on that sort of very powerful insight about what is it that has the capacity to bring out the worst in us. I think the sense of identity that we have to any clan or any group or country, the stronger that you can make that identity seem for that individual, it seems the greater is the power for divisiveness and sort of evenness that comes out.
Absolutely.
If you reflect on it, just 2 sort of things. One, if you think of any sort of spiritual guidance you get, is about how you can devolve or dissolve your sense of identity, and you can link it to how that is a source of so much evil in the world. And what struck me was that the conversation that Sandeep circulated, which drew all kinds of comments, about Ajay Banga. Midway into his role, he was asked by his board what kept him awake at night. And the surprising answer to me, what he said, was chauvinistic nationalism. He said the thing that he worried about the most in terms of his business was when there was this sense of very strong chauvinistic identity to national borders and how that can be a great impediment. So I thought that was a very interesting sort of insight from the identity question.
Mhm, mhm. Very true.
Very true, very true.
Yeah,
I think
Rama.
one other comment I have on what Gautam said.
Nidhi,
was-
I think Nidhi, you'll get a chance after Rama speaks. I think.
Okay, sorry.
Ladies
Go ahead,
first,
Rama.
I'm sure that's okay.
Rama, go ahead.
No, I just want to tee off on a bit what Cripps talked about. You know, there are, I guess, 3 phases of this whole messes. One is the colonial phase. And while we can debate whether the Belgians were bad or the Brits were bad, etc., etc., at the end of the day, it is basically one of levels of degradation. And for example, the Belgians had in the park close to where I used to live, right to the turn of the centuries, some Zairian tribals housed in a hut, and Belgians would come and visit it like a zoo, because that was the way they would be exposed to Les Noirs, the blacks. So there's the colonial degradation. Then there's a second part, which I would assert is the post-colonial regimes, where there has been degradation that has taken place because of specific hate being created. And this hate, with all due respect, is not created by the colonial regimes, but by the internal machinations of internal, whether you call politicians or people. Now, what is more scary is the third level, which is a technology-driven kind of challenges. Because with platforms, whether it is Facebook or social media, WhatsApp, where people deliberately distort viewpoints and pass it off with technological kind of like megaphones, hate has become really very scary. The challenge really is whether each of us has a role to play in voicing our opposition to it, or by silence, replicating what the Germans did in the period from 1930 to 1938. That is, for me, a fundamental moral dilemma beyond what anybody else says. And of course, I tend to be still a very impressionable, passionate 17-year-old. And that's why you see me being very vocal from time to time. But that's a critical individual choice that people will have to make when looking at it. Not that I think such tragedies will be avoided, but will be at least curtailed. So that's why the choice of the book for me was really phenomenal, not because of what it represented, but with the fears that it could potentially capture for the future.
Very true.
Yeah.
You know, another
Nidhi, you want
quote-
to continue your talk? I think, sorry to interrupt you.
No, Rama actually said things very well and touched upon what the point that I was trying to make in response to Gautam's just was that, you know, the Belgians may have started the process, but ultimately the carnage was done by the Rwandans. In everything, we tend to blame colonialism, and there's probably some small value to that. But the mistake is that that then prevents us from facing up to our own responsibilities. Someone can place the gun in your hand, you don't have to fire it. Same thing with India and Hindu-Muslim divisions. Until we acknowledge that a large part of the responsibility lies with us, I think we cannot move on.
I agree fully.
Mhm, mhm.
No one forces
Yeah.
you to do anything. It is within your control.
Yeah, I
And
think
there are
yesterday-
always-
I do want to make one
Yesterday-
very important point
Go ahead.
on this whole, because if you go read the history of this Rwandan genocide, this frenzy was whipped up by this radio station, right? People
Yeah.
used to listen to this radio, and the radio station would invoke this hate. Now, here's the important thing. That was in the age of radio. Today, we are in the age of social media. Within one click, everybody knows about it on WhatsApp or whatever. And just like there was this bank run on Silicon Valley Bank, it's fostered by social media. Can you imagine the same thing happening, based on these genocidal tendencies that everyone else is pointing out are within us? Everybody has these feelings about, somebody is bad on the other side.
Yeah,
And
I think, Shankar, to your point, you pointed out the good side of the US, but what happened on January 6th, thanks to Trump, was a result of the social media, largely. So that's to blame.
so
when
we
you
have
go
to be
for-
really careful about the social media, and make sure each of us has a role to play to say, this is fake, or hang on, calm down, whatever,
That perhaps explains that whenever there is trouble anticipated in India, they switch off the internet. They did it in UP recently. They constantly do it in Kashmir, and people complain, why is the government denying them, freedom of speech? The fact is that freedom of speech is used to whip up sentiments and, instigate riots.
Yeah, this
Can I just get
morning
back
I
to-
read about that happening in Manipur, Sandeep.
Yeah.
There are a lot of violent clashes, and they shut down the internet for that reason. in
So
Manipur.
one
Can I
thing
just
coming back
get
to the book. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Anjali, please. I'll come after you.
I had one clarification question that the parents didn't know or didn't look for their children. That was sort of left open. Kums,
No.
did you?
No, can I just comment a little bit on the historical narrative here? Why Rwanda is a little more horrible, and I say horrible within quotes, compared to anything else. This is one of the very few places where the United Nations was there. The United Nations force was led by a senior Canadian general. The guy was a coward. And then when the court of inquiry took place in Canada, the guy cried, but he was basically saying he was dancing the devils. The issue was, and going back to what Srivi said, the US has been a benign kind of despot, if I could use that paradox, because this guy Clinton could have intervened more strongly through the United Nations. But the UN peacekeeping forces were just chopped off at the knees, and they had this guy who had a fall. And this is one of the rare occasions when a Western intervention could have solved the problem and nipped in the bud. Now, we can argue the same thing could have happened during the partition, because the Indian army was commanded by a Brit and the Pakistan army commanded by a Brit, etc., etc. But this is one of the very, very worst. Not in Cambodia, not in Rohingya, not in Sarajevo has there been a possibility of an intervention where the post-Western, quote unquote, political order failed abysmally. And that's the reason why Clinton at the end apologized for the genocide. And even the choice of genocide was used very carefully, because initially in the US, they didn't want to use it because they only want to talk as the Holocaust being a genocide. Otherwise, it puts a moral dilemma on the rest of us. So, that's the reason why I feel that not just because of the way the book is, it goes back to what Anjali, you said, it is a huge amount of messes that were rolled under the carpet.
Rama, Anu has been waiting, so let's give her a chance. Go ahead, Anu.
Thanks. I was just going to follow up on Trivi's conclusion, right? I think all of you have brought up such fantastic points about genocide as a whole, but I think he ended up with a very personal note as to what would we have done. And actually, when I was, towards the end of the book, you could see the anger that's boiling in Clementine. And I basically, I think I'm more like Claire. I think I would suppress it and, carry on with my life and say that's the way life is. Let's go forward. But I thought it was pretty interesting to just reflect on for a minute on, how would circumstances, affect our decisions.
I have a slightly different perspective to this. I feel that while Claire went on with her life quietly and not trying to recall the trauma, Clementine seems to have found a way to commercially exploit her story. And therefore, she continues to whip up her past memories, her trauma, for the sake of commercially and cashing it. That is my gut.
And is there something wrong with that, Chacha?
No. I'm just saying
Oh, okay.
nothing wrong means. Well, well, the fact is that she is taking a route which is distressful. Why she is taking that distressful route while she can say to take the same strategy as her elder sister? Why is
Because there
she
is a
not
need
doing
to.
that? Why
there
is
is
she
a need
going back to her childhood and whipping up, her old what do you call sad memories? Why is she doing that?
That
Why is
because
she remembering?
she's coming to terms with all
And
that
I
by
don't think she's coming in
expressing.
term, Kumud.
No,
Kumud, the
No,
more
she
you're
you
is.
also
talk about,
educating
the
people,
more you
Chacha.
talk
Yeah.
about your
Sandeep, I have
history.
a story, of Navtej Sarna, who's a really good friend of ours. His father has written a book about partition, which I read in translation. And that has not done as well, but it is as moving. And I think by expressing those stories, both traumas, etc., he has also let loose. Even Elie Wiesel's Night, which is referenced in this book, does talk about the trauma, and it has become one of the biggest books about the Holocaust. Now, did he commercially exploit it or didn't he commercially exploit it? He's very well known because he wrote about it. So I think unless some of these things are written about and talked about, I never knew about the Rwandan genocide as I did after reading this book. And Milind, when he spoke to me and he said, Anjali, would you like to be a reader? And I said, Milind, I can't bear it. I don't want to have anything more. I finished the book in 2 days or whatever, and I could have easily done the reading because I had read it so much in advance, but I didn't want to go back to it. It touched me too much. It was too distressing, it was too emotional. But because of that book that Kumud has given us to read, I've understood more about the Rwandan genocide than I ever understood. And this conversation today, which explains the history, the fact that this girl has strung together the beads in different ways, that she's still living with the trauma, even the point that Trivi brought out, that there was generosity displayed towards her as a child, but not towards her elder sister. So I think that understanding of this context enables you to also appreciate, as Kum said, what our parents went through in partition, because Kum is lucky her mom at least has spoken about it. My father only spoke about it in the last 6 weeks of his life. So many people didn't even talk about what they went through. Yeah. So maybe these books, this literature, enables us to understand what is the past and maybe how to avoid it. To go back to what Trivi was saying, I think, how do we prevent this from happening again? If we've never written about it, never heard it, never seen the trauma of it, we're never going to really know how we can see the seeds of this happening around us and how we can prevent it, because we are seeing the seeds of it being planted.
Yeah, right. Just a small digression, guys. We all wanted to play the birthday song for Marise's mom, but they seem to have left. So Srinivas, later you can send her the recording. If you do that on behalf of all of us, that would be good.
We'll do that.
Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Ishan, did you want to say something?
No. Sorry, that was, no, I was, no, that's fine. I was just thinking that seeds erupt after 10, 20, 30 years, so I don't think that the poor Hutus and Tutus killed each other. I think the Belgians caused it by segregation. So what happens is that seeds are sown and they take a long time. I mean, I've seen this in Lebanon, Abdul was talking about some place, I think Sarajevo, Lebanon still has it from the 60s. Show me roads where half of it was controlled by this, or Ireland, Anjali, where you and me went. The troubles and all they're talking about is 60 years old, but the scars are still there. So these are deep-seated things which take a long time to heal.
When I read the book, Ishan, to continue your thought, I was wondering if this genocide went on for 100 days. Definitely the Western nations knew about it within a few days of it beginning. And yet, to the point some of you made, there was absolutely no intervention for 100 days. And that is difficult to imagine. why that happened.
I still
I
believe
have-
Sudan. I still believe Sudan is getting attention because there is a port in the Mediterranean there, which both the US and Russia covet. If it was deep inside Africa, it would be 2 years before we knew what the hell was going on.
And there's oil, isn't it?
And there's oil and there's a port. It's
Yeah.
part of that. It's very geostrategic, that belt. So people are bothering about it. I mean, that's the reality of life. I mean, it's, and unfortunately, I think, for all its curses and all its evils of social media, I think that today, because that kind of media exists,
जाओ यहाँ से
you at least know.
पिक्चर में आ रहा है
You're
Sorry.
shouting, Gautam or your staff? Who are you shouting at?
Chandar, our
Joking.
Nepali boy.
I didn't want the light. He put on the light. I didn't want the light.
I was just joking. I'm kidding. But I think that honestly, what's happening is that we're getting to know so much more. Earlier, you had to visit a place to get to know about it. Whereas today, there's a book, and then from there you Google and you get history, and you have people like Trivi who will read even more and give us more information. And I think that it's making us all so much more aware. And one of the problems of being aware is it's also quicker. You can get more depressed also when you understand the underbelly of man, which is not very, very nice.
But what I took away from what Nidhi said was that you can't blame the Belgians alone. You can't blame the Brits alone. Unless she used a very nice term. She said, he can put a rifle in your hand, but it's up to you if you want to shoot.
But then
So she's saying you've got to take responsibility here. And I agree.
And it's like that train story that Kumud told us about the father who was saved because he had
Jahangir.
killed, and everybody else was killed. But this Muslim guy said, listen, Jahangir is my chacha's son. So he had the gun, but he chose not to fire it.
Exception proves the rule. I'll just make one more statement, Gautam. I refuse to be over this gun business. It's an issue I have with all my American friends. Okay. The largest lobbying is done by the gun lobby, and the most famous statement, which every American will give you, is at least white Americans who I know who all keep guns, will tell you is guns don't kill, people do. It's the most famous advertising line of the National Rifle Association.
NRA. I was about to say that. Yeah.
It's a bloody disaster.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
So I think that ultimately guns kill. These things kill. You see this, it happens. And I think that you have to judge se nikalna chalega in cheezon ko. You can't draw.
I think the NRA uses it very perversely. Ishan.
Very perversely. I know
Very
that.
perversely.
I know.
It's terrible what is happening with the gun-related policy.
And they're the biggest donors to the Republicans, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, they are.
Absolutely.
Tobacco, even the Koch brothers were not in guns. But you're right, it's middle America where the money is, the private families are, and it's agriculture, it's Carlisle.
Let's not get diverted into guns. I think the point that Ishan is making is that once you put a gun in somebody's hand, you
You're
are
giving
giving
him
the person the
license.
power to kill. So similarly, spreading social media, like Trivi was saying, spreading bad social media, you're giving people a license to hate others. So just like we shouldn't be giving guns to people who are not, so that they cannot kill even if they want to. Similarly, we should not be spreading bad seeds in social media so you don't invoke hate, you don't water the hate and grow it. I think that's the point that is being made.
I just want to add one small reflection, which slightly takes it off. I used to wonder, in Punjab, a beautiful state, when it got separated and one side and the other side, and it was really a brutal partition that took place and people got killed on both the sides, which is a very unfortunate thing. And not to that scale, but coming to my own state of Andhra and Telangana, the politicians, believe me, that they try to whip up passions. They wanted to say these people are different and these people got exploited. So they did everything, and then the political parties also came out like that. They won the elections and they urged the people to hate each other. But the reality is that after 5 years, 6 years of partition, so-called smaller partition, there's no hatred. I'm sitting in Hyderabad, which is Telangana. I'm from Andhra. No one cares, no one bothers, and it's all over the place. So I think there is a culture, families, and other softer aspects, which if they can get into people, not just guns and then some third party instigating you. If that sort of a thoughts can be brought in, I think that will heal the wounds.
Very
Good
true.
point. Very good point.
Abdul, you
Excellent.
wanted to say something?
Fully agree.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Abdul.
Uh,
Abdul?
You know, in my classes, MBA classes for group projects, I had a rule. You cannot have a person from your own country as your project teammate. And if there is an enemy country, I assign them to be together. You have to work together. So I remember
Right.
by chance in one particular semester, I had a Greek Cypriot student and a Turkish Cypriot student in my class. So I forced them to work together. And at the end of the semester, they both came to me. Initially, they were resistant. They came to me to thank me, saying that they discovered that they were the same. So
Correct.
I think personal face-to-face interaction can make us understand the humanity of the other. When we think of them as an abstract category, it is very easy to hate.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Yesterday, I heard a quote being used at this session I went to with the World Bank president. He quoted Martin Luther King as saying, if you feel pain yourself, you know you are alive. But if you can feel the pain of others, then you are a human being. And
Human
I
being.
thought that
Yeah.
was a
That's
very,
Empathy,
very
yeah.
powerful, very powerful.
Empathy.
Very powerful.
There was one other comment that I liked in the book where Claire says there are no free gifts. I think that was also very true. While you admire people who do good, they're also getting something out of it. They're getting feelings of validation, how generous I am, how great I am. So, of course, it's always nice to be grateful, but there's no need to be overly grateful either, I feel.